The bus smelled like floor cleaner and somebody's leftover fast food, and I was counting coins in my palm when my phone buzzed again. Reminder. Balance due Friday. $1,200. Pediatric Surgical Services, UNM. I already knew the number. I'd been carrying it around in my head for 2 weeks like a rock in a shoe, always there, always pressing. Mateo needed the surgery by end of the month, or the clinic would push him to the back of the wait list. The surgeon had been patient with us, but patience runs out when the invoices don't. My mother had called 3 times that week, her voice carefully steady in the way it got when she was trying not to cry in front of me. I was 22. I was supposed to have this handled. I closed my hand around the coins. $8 and some change. My mother had pressed bus fare into my palm before I left and hadn't said anything about it, which was worse than if she had. The bus was half empty at 9:30 on a Tuesday. Outside the window, the South Valley slid past in pieces. Bodegas with metal grates pulled down for the night. A laundromat still lit up and going. A woman walking a small dog on a sidewalk that needed repaving. Past the overpass, the city thinned out fast. The desert doesn't wait politely for the suburbs to end. It just shows up, flat and enormous, and the sky above it goes from a bruised purple to pure black, faster than feels natural. I got off at the stop near the interchange and walked the rest of the way. El Mercado sat about a quarter mile off I-25, and even from that distance, it looked wrong in the landscape. Not wrong like a mistake, wrong like the scale of it didn't belong to the same world as everything around it. The building was massive in a way that made the parking lot look small, and the parking lot could have held 3 of my apartment complex. The sign was lit in red and yellow, clean lettering, the kind of logo a design team spent 6 months on to look approachable. The building itself was pale concrete with a terracotta stripe running the roof line. Southwestern style, like someone had tried to make a big box store feel local. It almost worked. Almost. The Sandia Mountains were visible to the east, nothing but black cutouts against a sky that had finished going dark. No stars where the parking lot lights reached, just that wide flat nothing above the desert, and the building glowing in the middle of it. I pulled my jacket tighter and walked toward the employee entrance. The security guard's name tag said R. Flores. He was a heavy-set man in a polo shirt that didn't quite match the store's uniform colors, and he checked my ID for longer than any ID ever needed to be checked. He typed something into a tablet, waited, typed again, read something, typed again. I stood at the window and tried to look like a normal person starting a normal job. "First night?" I asked. "Sign here." He slid the tablet toward me through the gap in the window. I signed. He printed a sticker badge with my name on it and pressed it to my chest without looking at my face. Then he buzzed the door open without a word. The break room was fluorescent and cold, 4 folding chairs and a round table with a coffee maker that looked like it had been donated by someone who'd bought a better one. A poster on the wall showed the El Mercado mission statement in big, friendly font. I sat down and waited. At 9:58, Manager Vega walked in. She was in her late 40s, short hair going gray at the temples, a yellow El Mercado vest over a black long-sleeved shirt. The vest had a patch that said Night Operations. She moved like someone who had run through the same routine so many times they'd stopped processing it. Not hurried, not slow, just efficient. She set a folded yellow vest on the table in front of me, then set a laminated card next to it. "Danny Salazar," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am. Retail before?" 2 years at a CVS on Central. Stocking, mostly nights. She nodded like I'd confirmed something. "Pay is $22 an hour, direct deposit Friday. Your shift runs 10 to 5, Sunday through Thursday. Tonight you're in home goods, aisle 14 through 22, resetting displays." She slid the laminated card closer to me. "Read this first." I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, thick laminate, the kind they used for building access cards. The text was printed small but clear. Night Operations Employee Guidelines, El Mercado. Rule 1. Keep all showroom lights on during your shift. If a section goes dark, leave it immediately. Do not re-enter until morning. Rule 2. Do not enter the kids' corral after 1:10 a.m. The door will be closed. Do not open it. Do not answer if someone calls your name from inside. Rule 3. If the store chime rings without an announcement, face the nearest wall for 60 seconds. Count out loud. Do not turn around. Do not close your eyes. Rule 4. If you encounter an employee without a name tag, hand them a blue receipt from the envelope and walk away immediately. Do not speak. Do not look at their hands. Rule 5. Leave at 4:58 a.m. through loading dock door 3. Not before, not after, not through any other exit. I read it twice. Every job had its quirks. Don't park in lot B. Don't use the freight elevator after hours. Sign the log before your break. Rules that made sense once you knew the history behind them, or didn't make sense at all but weren't worth arguing about. These were different. These felt like they had been written by someone who'd already been scared once and was doing their best to make sure it didn't happen to the next person. "What's the kids' corral?" I asked. "Children's section. 3rd floor, east wing." She slid a small manila envelope across the table. "Blue receipts. Keep them on you at all times. 4 in there. That's enough for one shift." I opened the envelope. 4 slips of pale blue paper, each printed with a $0 total and a barcode at the bottom. "And if I see someone without a name tag, I hand them one of these?" "Yes. Don't speak to them. Don't look at their hands. Give the receipt and walk away." I turned one of the slips over in my fingers. Has that happened? An employee without a name tag? Vega looked at me for just a moment. One of those looks where something shifts behind a person's eyes without their face moving, like a door closing quietly somewhere in a back room. "Follow the rules and your shift will be fine." She pushed back her chair. "Questions about the stocking assignment?" "No, I think I've got it." She was already standing. Her left hand was gloved, a thin black compression glove, and she kept it angled away from me. I noticed it. I filed it away somewhere and didn't take it back out until later. The store at 10:15 at night was a different building than it was at noon. That sounds obvious, but I mean it in a way that took some getting used to. The ceilings ran 20, maybe 25 feet high, and the fluorescence above them filled everything with an even white light that had no shadows and no warmth. With customers and carts and the PA system going, you probably never thought about the ceiling at all. Alone, you couldn't stop noticing it. The hum of the lights was constant, not loud but continuous, like the building was holding a single breath. My footsteps on the linoleum were the loudest thing in aisle 14. The work was straightforward and familiar. My cart had a printed assignment sheet clipped to the handle, and the shelf tags told me what went where, and I just worked. Toasters, blenders, dish sets in printed cardboard boxes. Lift, position, straighten, move on. The CVS had been smaller and closer, and the night shift there had never quite felt like this, but the work itself was the same. It was something to do with my hands while my brain kept running numbers. $1,200, 3 days until Friday, 22 an hour, one shift, 150 some after taxes. The math never came out right. That was the whole problem. I'd been doing it for 2 weeks and it never came out right. I thought about Mateo. He was probably asleep by now. He slept on his stomach with his head turned toward the wall, and he snored quietly. And sometimes in the morning he'd come into the kitchen with sleep lines on his face and tell me about his dreams like they were breaking news. "Danny, there was a horse in the apartment. We had to get it out, but it didn't want to leave." "What did you do?" "Talk to it. Did it work?" He'd shrug. "Sort of. That was Mateo. Everything was sort of workable if you just talked to it long enough. By 11:30, I'd finished 14 and 15. I stopped at the end of aisle 16 to drink some water, looking back toward the front of the store. The main entrance doors were visible. 2 sets of sliding glass, the parking lot lights glowing orange beyond them. No cars moving, nobody outside. Just the flat dark of the desert past the lot's edge. Something about that darkness felt close, like it was pressing against the glass. I went back to work. At 11:47, the store chime rang. 2 soft tones, a ding-dong, the kind that always preceded an announcement. I waited for the voice. Every retail job I'd ever worked, the chime came with a voice right behind it. Clean up on aisle 6. Register assistance needed at lane 3. The chime was just the signal. No voice came. I stood in the middle of aisle 16, holding a box of dish towels, and waited. 5 seconds. The lights didn't flicker. The hum continued. Nothing happened. Then I remembered Rule 3. I set the dish towels down on the cart carefully, turned to face the shelving unit on my right, and started counting out loud. Low, just above a whisper. 1, 2, 3. It felt ridiculous. I was aware of how it looked. A 22-year-old man standing with his nose 8 inches from a shelf of flour sack towels, counting to himself like a kid during hide and seek. I almost laughed. The laugh was right there, ready to come out. By 8, I didn't want to laugh anymore. The sound started somewhere behind me, from the direction of aisle 17, or maybe the main thoroughfare between sections. It was a dragging sound. Not scraping, not sliding. Something heavier and slower than either of those. Like something substantial being pulled across linoleum by something that had no reason to hurry. The pace of it was what got to me. It wasn't moving fast. It wasn't rushing. It was just moving. 15, 16, 17. The smell came at around 20. It was hard to name exactly. Wet paper was closest. Old wood after rain. It reminded me of my grandfather's storage shed, where he kept 30 years of hardware store documents in cardboard boxes, old receipts and order forms and carbon copies going soft in the New Mexico summers, turning fragile at the edges. That smell, but heavier, like it was the only thing in the air. 28, 29, 30. The dragging stopped. I kept counting. I fixed my eyes on a shelf label in front of me. Assorted flour sack towels, 5-pack, $8.99. And I did not blink, and I did not turn around. 53, 54, 55, 58, 59, 60. I turned around. The aisle was empty. The main thoroughfare beyond it was empty. Lights on everywhere, all the same flat white. No movement, no sound except the hum. I stood still for a moment, let my breath even out. The toaster display sat directly across from me on a mid-aisle end cap. A row of them facing out, silver and black, their surfaces polished enough to catch the fluorescent light and reflect it back. I could see myself in the nearest one, warped slightly by the curve of the chrome. Vest, jeans, cart behind me. I looked at the space behind my reflection. There was a figure there. Tall, brown uniform, standing still in the middle of the aisle behind where I stood. I spun around. Empty. The aisle was completely empty in both directions, all the way to the back wall. I looked back at the toaster, just my own reflection this time. Just me and the shelves and the lights. I told myself it was the chrome, the curved surface, the angle. Reflections do that. Pull in things at the edges, invent shapes from lighting and expectation. I'd read something like that once. I believed it for maybe 30 seconds. Then I went back to stocking because the work was still there and I still needed the money. I was nearly finished with aisle 16 when I saw it. A slip of pale blue paper tucked under the bottom shelf, pushed back against the metal frame, almost flush with the linoleum. I crouched down and pulled it free. It was a blue receipt. Same format as the ones in my envelope. $0 total, barcode at the bottom. But it wasn't from my envelope. The blue was faded at the edges, the paper a little stiffer than mine, like it had been sitting there for a while. I turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that pressed hard into the paper, small and slightly uneven. Don't use this one. They know when it's wrong. I stayed crouched for a moment, just reading those 10 words. Read them again. Then I stood up and put the receipt in my back pocket, separate from the envelope. Down the aisle, the lights hummed. The store stretched in every direction, full of things that had prices, quiet in the way that large spaces are quiet when something has just left them. My phone said 12:02 a.m., 4 hours and 56 minutes left. I kept working. I spent the next 20 minutes trying to convince myself the reflection had been a trick of the chrome. The toasters on that end cap were curved, I told myself. Curved surfaces do weird things with angles. They pull in light from places you wouldn't expect, distort proportions, manufacture shapes out of nothing. I'd probably caught a glimpse of the cart behind me, or maybe my own shoulder at a strange angle, and my brain had done what brains do at midnight in empty buildings. It had filled in a shape. That was the reasonable explanation. I held on to it. By 12:15, I'd moved to aisle 17 and started on the dish sets. These were boxed in flat cardboard, stacked on pallets that had been left in the aisle during the day shift, somebody's job that hadn't gotten finished. The boxes were heavy and awkward, and lifting them took enough concentration that I could almost stop thinking about the toaster display. Almost. The work helped. It always did. There's something about the physical weight of something in your hands that pulls you back into your body and out of whatever spiral you've been circling. I lifted and positioned and straightened. I checked shelf tags. I moved on. The store's background music was still going, some kind of soft instrumental that El Mercado probably paid a subscription service for, the kind of music designed to be heard without being listened to. It was barely audible this far into the floor, more like an impression of music than actual sound. Below it, always, was the hum of the fluorescence. At 12:22, I stopped to drink some water and check the assignment sheet. I was maybe halfway through the restocking list. At this pace, I'd be in home goods until around 2:30, then move to the kitchenware section on the other side of the floor for the second half of the shift. That was fine. That was manageable. I put my water bottle back in the cart and picked up a box of salad bowls. That was when I saw the figure at the end of the aisle. It was standing where the aisle opened into the main thoroughfare, just at that boundary where the shelving ended and the wider walkway began. Yellow shirt, El Mercado yellow, same color as my vest. The right general shape of a person. But even from 30 feet away, in the flat white light, I could see there was no name tag on the chest. I stood still for a moment, holding the box of salad bowls. The figure didn't move, didn't look away, didn't do anything that a normal person waiting at the end of an aisle would do. Shift their weight, check their phone, glance around. It just stood there looking toward me with that specific stillness that isn't relaxed. It was the stillness of something that had already decided what it was going to do. Then it raised one hand and pointed. Not at me. Lower than my face. At my midsection. At my vest pocket, where I had the manila envelope with the blue receipts. My stomach dropped in the slow, nauseating way of something that has been falling for a while and finally lands. I thought about Rule 4. If you encounter an employee without a name tag, hand them a blue receipt from the envelope and walk away immediately. Do not speak. Do not look at their hands. Vega had said it plainly. From the envelope. My right hand went to my vest pocket where the envelope was. My left hand, almost on its own, went to my back jeans pocket instead, where the found receipt was, the one with the handwriting on the back. I don't know exactly why I did it that way. I think part of my brain was running a kind of panicked calculation. If I gave one of my 4 receipts away on the very first encounter, I'd be down to 3. The found receipt was extra, surplus. It made a certain kind of stupid sense in the moment, and in the moment, stupid sense felt like enough. I pulled the found receipt from my back pocket. I walked toward the figure, kept my eyes on the yellow shirt, not the face, not the hands. Put one foot in front of the other. The aisle felt slightly longer than it should have, not in some obvious way, just a few extra feet beyond what the shelf count suggested it should be, like the floor had stretched quietly in both directions when I wasn't paying attention. I held the receipt out when I was close enough, kept my eyes angled off to the side, and let go. There was a pause. 1 beat, 2. Then the receipt was taken. I turned to walk away. That was what Rule 4 said. Hand it over, walk away, don't speak, don't look at their hands. I had done 3 of those 4 things. I figured I was close enough. I was wrong. I'd taken maybe 4 steps when the quality of the air behind me changed. The only way I can describe it is that a room sounds different when someone behind you is about to say something. There's a kind of gathering in the air, an intake, a shift in pressure. My head turned before I'd made the decision to turn it. The figure had turned back toward me. Its arms were down at its sides, palms facing outward and upward, the way you might show someone your empty hands. And the palms were... I didn't process it right away. My eyes took in what was there, and my brain sat with it for a moment before the meaning arrived. Both palms had staples in them. Industrial staples, the heavy flat kind from a commercial staple gun, the kind used on packing crates and shipping materials. Not 1 or 2. Rows of them, driven straight through the skin from the base of each palm to just below the fingers, evenly spaced, flat and neat. The skin around each one was smooth and undisturbed. There was no blood, no swelling, no sign of tearing or injury. They looked like they had always been there, like they were part of the design. The figure's face. I looked at it for less than half a second before I looked away. What I'll say is that its eyes had numbers in them. Not painted on, not a reflection. Numbers that were inside the eyes the way a flame is inside glass. Digits scrolling and rearranging like a register running a calculation that hadn't finished yet. Then the store chime rang. Not the soft, 2-tone ding-dong from earlier. This was the same 2 tones, but louder and stretched, held open past where they should have ended, and the sound had a quality to it that I can't fully describe except to say it was wrong in a way that hit my back teeth and the insides of my ears at the same time. Not quite a bell, not quite a tone, something between the 2, oscillating in a register that felt less like sound and more like pressure. I ran. I didn't think about it. I turned and ran back down the aisle the way I'd come, past my cart, past the unfinished dish sets, past the toaster end cap and the home goods section, and the cheerful promotional displays. I ran toward the back of the store where the double doors to the stockroom were, and I hit them shoulder first at full speed and went through. The stockroom was several degrees cooler than the sales floor. That was the first thing I noticed when I stopped running, the refrigerated air mixing with the smell of concrete and cardboard and the grease from the freight equipment parked in rows near the far wall. Forklifts, pallet jacks, a motorized flatbed cart plugged into a charging station in the corner. The shelving back here ran all the way to the ceiling, 20 feet of metal racking loaded with boxed overstock, shrink-wrapped pallets, inventory waiting to be rotated out to the floor. The fluorescent tubes up in the highest reaches were off, or maybe missing, and the top third of the room was a different kind of dark than the bottom. Not quite pitch, but the kind of dim where cardboard and shadow blended into each other, and you couldn't tell where one ended and the other started. I got behind a pallet stack of water bottle cases, 12 packs of the store brand, and crouched there with my back against a metal support post. My breathing was too fast. I made it slow down. The chime had stopped. Or maybe I'd stopped being able to hear it through the double doors. Either way, nothing came through behind me, and after a few minutes, the quiet of the stockroom started to feel more like actual quiet and less like something holding its breath. I stayed where I was for a while. 7 minutes, maybe 8. Nothing came through the double doors. When my heart had settled, I sat down fully on the concrete floor with my back against the water pallets and took out the laminated card. Rule 4. If you encounter an employee without a name tag, hand them a blue receipt from the envelope and walk away immediately. Do not speak. Do not look at their hands. From the envelope. It said from the envelope specifically, and I had not used a receipt from the envelope. I had used the found receipt, the one with handwriting on the back that said, "Don't use this one." They know when it's wrong. Someone had written that knowing that I, or whoever came after them, might be tempted to use it. Someone had known what I would do before I did it. Someone had been here before me. I turned the card over and read the fine print on the back properly for the first time. I'd registered that it existed when Vega handed it to me, but I hadn't read it. The type was small enough that I had to hold the card close to my face. Property of El Mercado Night Operations. Do not remove from premises. Debt follows the card. I read it again. Then a third time, turning that last sentence over like an object I was trying to identify by feel. Not debt follows the employee. Debt follows the card. The card had been handed to me. Someone had had it before me. I put it back in my pocket and sat with that for a moment. There was a small break area at the back of the stockroom. A half-partition wall with a folding table, a microwave on a laminate shelf, and a vending machine that looked like it had been neglected for a long time. The machine's display was dark. There was a handwritten, broken sign taped to the coin slot, the tape yellowed at the edges. I wasn't sure why I walked over there. Maybe just to move, to do something with my body other than sit in a crouch behind water pallets and think. I stood in front of the machine and looked at the snacks behind the dim glass. Chips and cookies that would probably never be bought. And then I noticed the gap between the machine and the wall. It had been pulled a few inches forward from the wall. Not far, not obviously. Enough that you'd notice if you were looking at the wrong angle, or if you were the kind of person who paid attention to small displacements. Someone had moved it, and either not pushed it back all the way, or had left it deliberately where it was. I moved the machine a little further out. It rolled on its wheels more easily than I expected. Behind it, lying flat on the concrete floor, was a laminated card, same size as mine, same El Mercado logo in the corner, same 5 rules, same layout, same small print. But where my card was clean and still faintly glossy, this one had been handled so many times that the surface had gone matte. The corners had softened. The laminate along one edge was beginning to separate, lifting just slightly from the paper inside. There were smudges layered over smudges, the accumulated print of a hand that had reached for this card over and over across many shifts. And on both sides, in handwriting that was small and deliberate and had been added in multiple layers, some ink darker, some faded, some written over what was already there were notes. I crouched on the concrete floor of the stockroom at 12:35 in the morning, and I read every word. Next to Rule 4, in the margin, blue receipts are not free passes. Each one is a trade. You give one, your balance gets adjusted upward. Check the fine print after every shift. It changes. Next to Rule 3, count loud enough that you can hear your own voice over whatever sound it's making behind you. The counting isn't for the entity. It's to keep yourself here, in your own head, where it can't read you as clearly. Next to Rule 2, the timing is exact. 110 is not a general guideline. The door knows. The voice knows. Do not be curious about what it sounds like. Next to Rule 1, in writing that was pressed harder into the laminate than the rest, like it had been added while the writer was frightened. If the lights go off in your section while you're still in it, leave through the nearest cross aisle. Don't go back for your cart. On the back, Where my card had the fine print, this one had the same fine print, but above it, in ink that had dug faint grooves into the laminate surface, receipt is not a pass, it's a trade. Debt transfers. Vega knows and has always known. Below that, underlined twice, whoever signs the onboarding forms takes on the unpaid balance. There's a line under liability acknowledgement in the digital paperwork. No one reads it. I didn't read it. If you're reading this, you probably didn't either. Then, in writing, that was faster and less careful, like it had been added quickly at the end of a shift or in a hurry. My name was Tomas. I worked this job for 6 weeks. I tried to pay it down, but the receipts kept adding to the total and I couldn't get ahead of it. I tried to leave early twice. Don't do that. The third time I almost didn't make it back. I'm leaving this here because the next person should know what they walked into. If you're reading this, you're the next person. I'm sorry. I read those words. I read them again. Tomas. 6 weeks in this building, in this section, doing this job. Trying to work his way down to 0 and watching the number go the wrong direction with every receipt he handed over. Then gone, either by his own choice or someone else's, either out the right door or not. I took out my own card and held both side by side in the weak stockroom light, mine and Tomas's. The same document at 2 different points in its history, like before and after photos of something that had been through a lot. I read my fine print again. Property of El Mercado Night Operations. Do not remove from premises. Debt follows the card. I had read this 3 times now and registered it the same way each time. And then I saw, below that line, in print smaller than the rest of the text, the kind of small that made your eyes find something else to land on, a line that had not been there when Vega handed me this card at 9:58. I was certain of that. I would have read something that specific. Obligation, $1,200. Due, Friday. I stayed crouched on the stockroom floor for a while after that. $1,200. The exact number on my phone from the pediatric clinic. The exact number I had been doing broken math around for 2 weeks, counting on buses and in my apartment and in the bathroom at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. El Tasador had not guessed. It had not approximated. It had looked at whatever was visible to a thing that reads unpaid obligation, found the shape of my most pressing need, and written it down in official formatting. It had my brother's surgery cost on a laminated card. I thought about Mateo sleeping on his stomach with his face turned toward the wall. I thought about my mother pressing bus fare into my hand. I thought about Tomas writing, "I'm sorry" at the bottom of a laminated card and hiding it behind a broken vending machine so that some stranger he'd never meet would know what they'd walked into. I put both cards in my vest pocket. Then I sat on the concrete floor, not from fear anymore, but from something heavier, the kind of tired that isn't about sleep. I checked my phone. 12:48 a.m. Another automated reminder from the clinic's system had come in while I was in the stockroom. Payment due Friday. Balance, $1,200. I dismissed it. Somewhere past the double doors, the store's background music had resumed, the same soft instrumental, the hum of the fluorescence underneath it, steady and constant, like the building's pulse. I had 4 hours and 10 minutes left in the shift. I had 3 days until Friday, and I had used the wrong receipt on my first encounter, which meant the balance on that laminated card was probably already moving in the direction Tomas had warned me about. I got up off the floor, straightened my vest, and went back through the double doors onto the sales floor. The lights were on everywhere I could see, all the way to the far walls. The aisle was empty. My cart was where I'd left it, the abandoned box of salad bowls still sitting on the top shelf. I picked it up, found its place on the shelf, set it down carefully, and picked up the next box. I kept my eyes off the toaster display on the end cap. I did not look at my hands. The math was still the math. $22 an hour and Mateo's surgery and a Friday deadline. The entity hadn't changed any of that. It had just made sure I understood that it had been reading the same numbers I had, and that it had gotten to them first. The 12 minutes between getting back to the sales floor and 1 a.m. were the longest of my life. I tried to work. I picked up where I'd left off on the dish sets because standing still felt worse than moving, and because the assignment sheet was still on my cart and the work still needed doing regardless of what I now knew about the building I was doing it in. My hands moved. My brain ran the same loop it had been running since I'd found Tomas's card on the stockroom floor. He'd been here 6 weeks. He'd handed receipts over and watched his balance climb instead of drop. He'd tried to leave early twice. The third time, he almost didn't make it back, and then he was just gone. I kept my eyes off every reflective surface in aisle 17. At 12:57, I put a box on the wrong shelf, noticed, fixed it. At 12:59, I checked my phone. Then I put it away and walked toward the front of the store. I don't know exactly what I thought was going to happen. Some part of me, the part that had been doing retail math since I was 18 and understood how buildings worked, had decided that the smartest move was to leave, go home, and think clearly in my own apartment about whether $22 an hour was worth any of this. The main entrance doors were maybe 100 feet ahead, visible down the wide center aisle, the parking lot lights orange beyond the glass. I walked toward them at a normal pace. I was 15 feet from the doors when I noticed they had no push bars. The exterior sliding doors had a sensor above them, but the sensor light was red instead of green. I pressed my palm flat against the glass anyway. Nothing moved. The glass was cold under my hand. Through it, I could see the parking lot, empty, the Sandia Mountains invisible behind the flat black of the early morning sky. My reflection looked back at me from the glass. Vest, jeans, eyes that were more tired than scared. And behind my reflection, maybe 10 feet back from where I stood, there was a figure. Tall, brown uniform. A name tag in the same clean El Mercado font. Its eyes were black and full of numbers, not scrolling the way they had on the collector in aisle 17. Still, like the calculation had already finished and the result had been written down. I backed away from the door slowly, the way you move away from something that hasn't decided to come at you yet. And when I'd put 20 feet between myself and the glass, I turned around. Nothing behind me. I looked back at the door. The figure was still there. It raised one hand and pointed toward the back of the store. Then the lights in the home goods section behind me went out. Not flickering, not shorting. Clean off, like a switch. One section dark while everything else stayed lit. 5 seconds later, the section next to it, then the next one. A sequence moving from the front of the store toward the back, narrowing the lit space around me like water draining from a tub. I moved toward the escalators. I didn't run, but I moved fast. The escalators were at the back center of the first floor, and by the time I reached them, the dark had eaten most of the front half of the building. I didn't look back at what might be moving in those sections. I kept my eyes on what was lit, and I moved through it. The escalator was running. That seemed wrong. Escalators in empty stores after midnight should have been powered down, but it was moving upward, slow and steady. The steps lit from underneath with that pale yellow light. I stepped on. The second floor was housewares and bedding. The shelving here was lower than the first floor, 5-foot units instead of 8, which made the space feel open and watched from every angle. The overhead signs caught my attention immediately. Everyone I could see was pointing the same direction, not cycling through departments. All of them at once, every backlit arrow on every hanging sign oriented toward the east wing. Kids' Corral to 3rd floor. I checked my phone. 1:03 a.m. I took the stairs up instead of the next escalator. The stairwell door was heavy, the push bar cold in my hand. I went through and climbed. My footsteps were loud on concrete. The stairwell had no music, no hum, nothing but my breathing and the echo off the walls. The 3rd floor door opened into the children's section. I don't know what it looked like during the day. At 1:06 a.m., It looked like something assembled by a person who had studied children's sections, but never actually been in one while it was alive. Toys and stuffed animals on their shelves in correct positions, all facing outward for customers that weren't coming. The cartoon packaging colors, reds and yellows, wide printed eyes, wrong in the flat nighttime light. Too arranged, too still. At the far end of the floor, past the toy aisles and the small furniture displays, was a frosted glass door. Kids Corral, printed in El Mercado's rounded font. Below it, soft play area, supervised entry required. The frosted glass was opaque enough that I couldn't see through it. Just a suggestion of pale light on the other side, warmer than fluorescent, steadier. I stopped 20 feet from the door. My phone said 1:07 a.m. I hadn't come here because I wanted to. I'd come because the lights had gone out behind me in a sequence that removed every other option, and the escalators had been running, and every sign on the second floor had pointed this way. It hit me, standing there in the toy section at 1:07 in the morning, that I'd been moved here the way you move a checker across a board. Not forced, just all the other squares taken away. I pulled out both cards, mine and Tomas's. I read his Rule 2 note again. The timing is exact. 1:10 is not a general guideline. The door knows, the voice knows. Do not be curious about what it sounds like. I hadn't intended to be curious. I hadn't intended to be on the third floor at all. At 1:08, I pressed my back against the toy shelves behind me and stayed there with my hands at my sides. I kept the door in my line of sight. The plan, simple as it was, wait past 1:10, wait for the lower lights to come back on, then go back down and finish the shift until 4:58. At 1:09, the voice started. It came from behind the frosted glass. A child's voice, high and uncertain, the kind of sound that gets past whatever part of your brain handles threat assessment and lands somewhere older. Danny. A pause. Danny, I'm scared. Can you help me? It knew my name. I didn't move. I watched the clock on my phone. Danny, it's dark in here. The voice was getting closer to the door without moving toward it, like the volume itself was rising, like a hand turning a dial. Will you come in? I don't want to be alone. Something in my chest was pulling toward the door. Not logic. I knew what was behind it. But the voice was calibrated for exactly the part of me that had taken this job in the first place. The part that couldn't stand the idea of someone small being scared in the dark. Then the voice changed. Not gradually. Between one syllable and the next, the child's voice was simply gone, and something else was using the same air. Adult, level, patient, in a way that wasn't kindness. Patient the way a thing that had been waiting for over a century was patient, because it had more time than I did, and it knew that. You're smart, it said. That's good, but you already used the wrong receipt. I took a step back. The obligation is recorded, it said, still through the glass, still unhurried. It doesn't expire. It doesn't transfer again unless the proper process is completed. 3 seconds. I had already turned when the door opened. Not all the way. A few inches. Enough that the pale, warm light from inside laid a thin strip across the tile floor. Enough for the hand to reach through. It was a large hand, brown sleeve pushed back at the wrist, industrial staples in rows across the palm, and the hand was holding something, pinched between 2 fingers, offered outward. My manila envelope. I reached for my vest pocket without thinking. Empty. I had no memory of it being taken. I ran. I went down the stairs faster than I should have and hit the first floor, moving, and didn't slow until I was through the stockroom doors. I grabbed a box cutter off a shelf near the entrance, not for any real reason, just to have something solid and purposeful in my hand, and kept moving toward the back of the building. The loading dock was through a set of heavy double doors past the freight equipment. I'd seen it briefly on Vega's first night walkthrough, and I remembered roughly where it sat. I found the doors and pushed through into the cold concrete space of the dock. The industrial compactor was against the back wall, green metal, commercial grade, built for cardboard and packaging. There was an access panel with a key switch and a button and a warning label worn mostly away. The key was in the switch, left there by whoever used it last. My envelope was gone. The 4 blue receipts were gone with it. I checked my vest pocket again. Empty. I checked my jeans. Then I found them in my back left pocket, the 4 receipts folded together where I'd had Tomas's card. I didn't remember moving them. I didn't remember taking them out of the envelope at all. But they were there, and my hands were shaking when I unfolded them. I turned the key in the compactor switch and hit the button. The machine came on loud, louder than I expected in the quiet of the dock, a grinding industrial noise that bounced hard off concrete walls. I fed the receipts in, one at a time, through the slot. The first 2 went quietly. The third made the machine stutter. The fourth made it scream. Not just mechanical. The grind rose into something with too many tones in it, a sound that was wrong in the same way the chime was wrong. Less like a sound, and more like pressure. The overhead lights in the loading dock flickered for the first time all night. The compactor shuddered against its anchor bolts, then it stopped, and the silence that followed was total, like the building had gone briefly somewhere else and come back. I turned the key back and took it out, put it in my pocket. Then I found a corner behind a stack of flattened cardboard bales, and I sat down on the cold concrete, and I stayed. 3 hours and some change passed. The loading dock didn't change. The lights held. Nothing came through the double doors. I sat with both cards in my hands and read Tomas's notes again in the low light, every line, 3 times through. I read the part where he said the receipts kept adding to the total. I read the part where he said the 3rd early attempt almost didn't let him come back. I read, "I'm sorry" at the bottom, and thought about what it cost to write that on a card you were leaving for a stranger. I thought about what the voice had said. You already used the wrong receipt. It had known. It had been watching the whole time. Watching since the moment I walked in and signed the onboarding forms, probably. Since before that, maybe. Since whatever clause was buried under liability acknowledgement had added my name to whatever list it kept. My phone died at 3:40. After that, I watched the wall clock above the freight entrance. Black hands, white face, loud second tick. The kind of clock that exists everywhere work gets done. I thought about Mateo, the horse dream, the sleep lines on his face, the way he'd shrug and say, sort of like that was a complete answer to any question. I thought about him sleeping right now in our mother's apartment while I sat on a loading dock floor 3 miles away, trying to outlast something that had been collecting unpaid debts since before my grandfather was born. At 4:45, I stood up, straightened my vest, and walked to loading dock door 3. The doors were numbered in stenciled white paint, a foot tall on each. I stood in front of door 3 and kept my hand off the bar. The dock clock said 4:51. I waited. The compactor had screamed. That meant the entity was going to be angrier next shift. Whatever I'd bought by destroying those receipts, I'd spend it before I even clocked in Sunday. I knew that the same way I knew everything else I'd learned tonight. The hard, slow way, by running out of options until only one was left. 4:57. I put my hand on the bar. 4:58. I pushed through. The air outside hit me the way desert mornings do. No transition, just suddenly different. Cold and wide and smelling of dust and the beginning of something. The sky had moved from black to that dark blue that comes just before gray, and the loading dock overhang threw a hard shadow across the concrete. Vega was standing on the apron with a clipboard. She handed me the timesheet without looking up. I signed at the bottom. My hand was still not entirely steady. She took the clipboard back and clipped the pen to it. I looked up at the building behind her. Every light inside was still on. Through the high roof-line windows, the fluorescent glow burned steady and unchanged. Like the building didn't know the world outside, it had almost gotten light. like it was still open for business and waiting. "Tomas is still in there," I said. Not a question this time. Vega was quiet for a moment. Somewhere out past the parking lot, the desert was beginning to separate itself from the dark, scrub and flat ground taking shape. And somewhere further, the sandias, invisible but there. The kind of country where the old stories settled in the ground and stayed. Where debts, according to the oral tradition that had apparently produced whatever lived inside El Mercado, were supposed to go to die. Except they hadn't died. They'd just changed form. "Sunday," Vega said. 10 p.m. She walked back through the side door. I stood on the loading dock with a signed timesheet in my hand, and the compactor key still in my pocket, and the building glowing behind me in the last of the dark. And I already knew what I was going to do. The math hadn't changed. The math never changed. That was the whole point. I folded the timesheet and walked toward the bus stop. The timesheet was a standard El Mercado form, store logo at the top, a grid of hours and pay rates below it. Vega had already filled in the shift hours. I stood on the loading dock apron and looked at the number at the bottom of the column. $154 before taxes. I did the subtraction from $1,200 in my head before I could stop myself. The answer was $1,046. I had been doing that same subtraction for 2 weeks, and it had never come out right. And standing in the early gray of a Wednesday morning with a signed timesheet in my hand, it still didn't come out right. The sky to the east had started changing. The full dark was gone, replaced by something thinner. A long, pale gray seeping in from the direction of the Sandias. The mountains were out there in it somewhere, the way they always were. The same ridgeline that had been watching this patch of desert since before anyone built anything on it. Since before a trading post burned down on this exact ground in 1918 and whatever was in the soil under it found a new kind of building to work with. Vega was writing something on her clipboard. I waited. "You knew," I said. "Before last night. The onboarding forms. The liability acknowledgement. You knew what it transferred when I signed." She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her face was the same as it had been at 10 o'clock the night before. Tired, careful, carrying something heavy in the usual way of people who've been carrying it for a while. "I told you the rules," she said. "That's not the same thing as telling me the truth." She held my look for a moment. "No," she said. "It isn't." She put the clipboard under her arm and leaned against the dock railing. When she spoke again, the anger was already gone from it. Not like she'd suppressed it, but like it had burned out a long time ago, and what was left was just the facts. "I've been on nights here for 7 years," she said. "My balance when I started was small. By the time I understood what the receipts were doing to it, it was too large to walk away from safely. Now it's..." She stopped. "I have a daughter in Española, 2 grandkids. I think about them the same way you think about your brother." The morning air smelled of dust and something faint underneath it, something green and sharp. Creosote, maybe, from somewhere past the parking lot's edge where the desert started. The kind of smell you only got after rain, or before it. Rare out here either way. "It doesn't want me to fail," I said. "It wants me to keep working." "It feeds on the weight of debt," she said. "On the math you do in your head when you're 3 days out from a deadline. It doesn't need you to default. It needs you to stay just close enough to paying that you keep trying." She looked at the timesheet in my hand. "You felt that before you ever walked through the door last night, on the bus, in your apartment. That's what it reads. That's what it's been reading since you signed the onboarding forms." I thought about the coins in my palm on the ride over, the $8, the way the clinic reminder had buzzed against my leg like it knew exactly what I was carrying. "It found me before I got here," I said. Vega didn't answer that. She didn't have to. The day shift started arriving around 5:15. I was still standing near the dock when a side door opened and a woman came out with a keyring and a coffee cup, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who had made this walk enough times to do it on autopilot. She stopped when she saw me. She was somewhere in her 50s, a blue El Mercado vest over a flannel shirt, hair gray streaked and braided down her back. Her name tag said Marta, day operations. She looked at me the way you look at someone you've heard about and hoped to avoid having to look at. New night shift, she said. Danny. She nodded slowly and took a sip of her coffee. Her eyes moved to the door behind me, then to the building, then back. First night? Yes. She was quiet for a moment in the way of someone deciding how much to give away. Then she said, "There's a charging cable by the freight desk inside, if your phone ran out." I looked at her. She already knew it had. "Go plug it in," she said. "Before the bus." I went inside. The break room was cold and fluorescent and smelled like old coffee. The cable was there below the bulletin board, plugged into a power strip, the end worn from use. I plugged my phone in and watched the screen come up on 2%. I waited until it hit 8, the same number I'd had in coins 16 hours ago, and unplugged it and went back outside. Marta was still there, about halfway through her coffee. She waited until I was close before she spoke, and when she did, her voice was quiet enough that it wouldn't carry back through the door. "The receipt in your envelope," she said. "Next time, use it on the second encounter, not the first." I stopped. "What happens at the second?" She shook her head. I don't know. The other kind of shake, the kind that means I won't say it out loud where it might hear. "The receipt you keep in your shoe," I said. "Does that work?" She looked down at her feet for a moment. "It has to be fresh. Printed that shift. It's not protection exactly. More like it makes you harder to read. Like you've already settled something small, so there's less to calculate." She looked back up at me. "It's not reliable, but it's better than nothing." The side door opened from inside, and a second day shift worker came through, and Marta straightened up and her face changed, closed off, professional again. She went inside without looking back at me. The door settled shut behind her with a quiet, final sound. Vega was at her car in the far corner of the lot when I crossed toward the street. A white sedan, older, dent in the rear quarter panel gone rusty at the edges. She was loading the clipboard into the back seat. "Tomas," I said when I was close enough. She closed the car door and looked at me over the roof. In the flat, early light, her face was just a person's face, tired and ordinary and belonging to someone who had made a series of decisions that had ended with her in a parking lot at 5 in the morning. "He tried to run," she said. "Not through the right door, not at the right time. He thought leaving fast enough would break the hold." She paused. "He's still in the building, somewhere on the upper floors." She paused again. "You can hear him sometimes, late in the shift, calling for help." From the kids' corral. I understood that without her saying it. The voice at 1:09 a.m., high and uncertain. "Danny. I'm scared. Can you help me? Not a child. Tomas." I put that somewhere in the back of my mind and left it there because there was nowhere useful to put it right now, and I still had to get through today and the day after. "If I quit," I said, "don't come back." Vega rested her forearms on the roof of the car. "The debt doesn't stay here. It follows you home. Works differently out there. Slower, less direct. But it'll show up in your brother's medical file. A balance that wasn't there before, or an insurance claim that gets denied for a reason no one can quite trace. Your mother's credit score dropping. The interest rate on any loan you apply for coming in just high enough to matter." She straightened up. "It collects at a distance, the same way it collects up close. It's patient. It has been patient for longer than anyone currently working here has been alive." The desert spread wide to the south and west of the parking lot, flat and enormous in the early gray. Past the city's edge somewhere, past the Rio Grande and the mesas, the Gila wilderness sat in the distant dark the way it always had. The place where the old stories said debts were supposed to go and die. Except this one had survived. It had found new containers for itself. Land grants, then a trading post, then a building with fluorescent lights and a digital signature field, and a clause buried in the fourth paragraph of a liability acknowledgement that nobody read. The curandera who blessed the foundation, I said. The iron and salt. She knew what was here. Vega opened her car door. She did what she could. The blessing kept it inside the property. If the rebar ever corrodes enough, she stopped. That's not your problem right now. Your problem is Friday. She got in and pulled the door shut. The car started and backed out of the space and left the lot without looking back. I stood in the parking lot for a moment after the car was gone, in the new light, with the building behind me still burning fluorescent through every window. Lights on in an empty store at 5:30 in the morning. Just running. Just waiting. The bus stop was a concrete bench and an open metal frame where a plexiglass sign panel had been at some point. I sat on the bench and held both cards in my hands, mine and Tomas's, and looked at the sandias. The light had reached the ridge now, real daylight starting to show the rock for what it was. I turned over my card and read the fine print. Property of El Mercado Night Operations. Do not remove from premises. Debt follows the card. Below it, obligation, $1,046. Due, Friday. I looked at it for a while. $1,200 minus $154 was $1,046. The number looked like the subtraction had been done honestly. But the starting figure had already been adjusted before I earned anything, and the interest had been calculated before I ever clocked out. It looked like progress. It was designed to look like progress. The whole system was designed to look like progress. Like if you just worked enough shifts and handed over enough receipts and followed enough rules, the number would eventually reach zero. It wouldn't reach zero. That was the design. It had always been the design, going back further than this building, further than the trading post, all the way back to the landowners and the Santa Fe ring and the workers whose names got crossed out in red when the accounts that could never balance were finally closed. El Tasador hadn't invented the system. It had just made one version of it visible. I had 8% on my phone. I opened it and found the clinic number and called. It rang twice. "Hi," I said. "This is Danny Salazar. My brother Mateo is a patient, pediatric surgery. I'm calling about the Friday balance." I stopped. "I have part of the payment. I'll have the rest by Friday. I got a new job." A pause. "It's a good job, great pay, just has some weird rules." The receptionist said they'd noted on the account. I thanked her and hung up. I looked at the card again. $1,046. I folded it and put it in my wallet, behind my ID, where I'd feel it whenever I reached for anything. He had been working in that building for 6 weeks, had tried to leave early 3 times, had left a note for a stranger on a card behind a vending machine, the last useful thing he could do. I thought about him up there on the upper floors somewhere in the permanent fluorescent afternoon of a closed store. And I thought about my mother pressing bus fare into my palm, and I thought about Mateo and the horse that didn't want to leave the apartment, and how the answer to that was just to talk to it long enough. I didn't know how to talk to what was in that building, but I knew how to follow rules, and I knew how to show up. The bus came at 5:43. I got on and paid with my phone and walked to the back. 3 rows from the back, like always. I didn't look out the window at the store, but I felt it watching, and I knew the rules weren't there to protect me from the entity. They were there to make sure I lasted long enough to owe more.